In February 14, 2024, Thornton Mansion. The night was drenched in darkness, the air cold and heavy with silence. Valentine's Day, a night meant for love and romance. But at the Thornton Mansion, love had turned into something far more sinister. The sirens wailed, piercing through the night as red and blue lights danced across the pristine white walls of the mansion. Neighbors gathered, whispering in hushed tones, their faces pale with shock. Something terrible had happened. Inside the master bedroom, Detective Lucas Reed stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. Blood smeared across the silk sheets, the sweet scent of roses tainted by the metallic stench of death. A lifeless body sprawled on the floor. Richard Thornton, the patriarch of the family, lay cold and motionless, his eyes wide open, frozen in a look of horror. A deep gash on his neck, blood pooling beneath him. But this wasn't just murder, this was personal, brutal. Detective Reed's gaze shifted to the nightstand, where a single card lay propped up, its edges stained with blood. A Valentine's Day card. The elegant handwriting mocked the scene before him. To the man I loved until I found out the truth. Reed's chest tightened, his mind racing. The truth? What truth? His eyes wandered to the shattered picture frame on the floor. The glass splintered, cutting through the faces in the photo. Richard, his son, Daniel, and Daniel's wife, Emily. A perfect family. Or was it all a lie? A voice echoed from behind. Him. Detective, the son is in the living room. He found the body. Reed's pulse quickened. Daniel Thornton, the heir to the Thornton fortune, the son who had everything until tonight. But was he just a grieving son? Or did he have a reason to kill his father? Reed's jaw clenched as he glanced at the blood-stained card once more. The truth. Whatever that meant, it was deadly enough to shatter a family and end a life. He turned to leave the room, his mind swirling with questions. What was the truth that led to murder? And who was willing to kill to keep? It buried 6 months earlier, August 10th, 2023. The sun hung high over the sprawling estate, its golden light cascading down on perfectly manicured lawns and rose gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly. The Thornton Mansion, a symbol of wealth, power, and perfection. To outsiders it was a castle, and inside lived the family that everyone envied. Richard Thornton, the patriarch, was the embodiment of success. Tall, commanding, with piercing blue eyes that could make even the most powerful men tremble. A billionaire businessman, known for his ruthless ambition and unshakable pride. But behind his charismatic smile was a man used to getting his way, no matter the cost. Daniel Thornton, his only son, was everything his father had hoped for, or at least that's what Richard liked to believe. Handsome, intelligent, and charming, Daniel was groomed to take over the family empire. But Daniel had always lived in his father's shadow, struggling to live up to the impossible expectations. No matter how hard he tried, it was never enough. You're weak, Daniel. You'll never be half the man I am, Richard's voice echoed. In Daniel's mind, a bitter reminder of the constant criticism. To the world, Daniel was the golden boy, the heir to $1 billion fortune. But behind closed doors, he was just a disappointment. The only solace Daniel found was in Emily, his wife. A stunning beauty with delicate features and a smile that could light up the room. Emily was everything Daniel wasn't, confident, ambitious, and adored by his father. Richard often praised her intelligence and charm, making no effort to hide his favoritism. But what no one knew was that Emily's charm was just a mask, hiding the cracks beneath. Their marriage was far from perfect. Late nights turned into silent dinners, and smiles became forced. Daniel noticed the distance growing between them, but he couldn't understand why. He tried to ignore the nagging feeling in his chest, convincing himself it was just his insecurities. "You're just being paranoid, Daniel," he'd whisper to himself. But even then the shadows of doubt wouldn't leave him. It was at the Thornton family's annual summer gala that Daniel first noticed it. The way Emily's eyes sparkled when she laughed, but only when Richard was around. The way her face lit up whenever Richard spoke to her, her smile lingering just a second too long. "You're imagining things," Daniel told himself, brushing off the uneasy feeling that twisted his stomach. But his eyes never left them, watching the way Emily's hand would rest on Richard's arm, the way Richard would lean in, whispering something that made her blush. It didn't make sense. Emily was his wife. Richard was his father. Yet the chemistry between them was undeniable. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a spark. One evening Daniel came home early from work, his head aching from another grueling day of trying to please his father. As he entered the mansion, laughter echoed down the hallway. Emily's laughter and Richard's. His heart dropped. Why? Were they together when he wasn't there? He walked down the hall, his footsteps quiet as he reached Richard's private study. The door was slightly open, just enough for him to see inside. Emily was sitting on Richard's desk, her legs crossed, her smile radiant. Richard stood close, too close, his eyes lingering on her as he poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Their conversation was playful, their laughter warm and intimate. "I've never met a woman like you, Emily," Richard said, his voice low and smooth. "You're extraordinary." Emily's cheeks flushed, her gaze dropping before meeting his. "You always know how to make me feel special, Richard." Daniel's heart pounded, his chest tightening as he watched the scene before him. It was innocent, but it wasn't. He backed away, his hands shaking, his mind racing. Was he losing his mind? Or was there really something going on? The questions gnawed at him, eating away at his sanity. He tried to push it aside, tried to be the man his father wanted him to be. But no matter how hard he tried, the image of Emily, laughing with Richard, haunted him. Every night he lay awake, his thoughts spiraling. Was he just being paranoid? Was he jealous of his father's relationship with Emily? Or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? The doubt consumed him, but he kept it buried. He didn't have proof, and without proof, it was just a suspicion, just a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. But in his heart, Daniel knew. He could feel the betrayal in his bones. His wife was hiding something. And the man he called father? He wasn't innocent either. Daniel swallowed the bitter taste of resentment, his jaw clenched as he stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying the laughter he wasn't a part of. He wouldn't rest until he knew the truth, because the perfect family image was just a lie. And all lies eventually crumble, even if it meant destroying the people he loved. "I'll find out what you're hiding, Emily, and when I do, there will be hell to pay." The stage was set, the betrayal was real, and the truth, it was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. In September 22, 2023, the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the sprawling estate. Inside the mansion, the air was thick, heavy with tension that no one spoke of but everyone felt. Secrets have a way of haunting even the most beautiful of places. Emily Thornton stood by the window, her eyes fixed on the garden below where Daniel was pacing, his phone pressed to his ear. His face was tense, his shoulders rigid, the familiar look of a man desperate for his father's approval. Daniel was always fighting battles no one could see. But tonight, Emily's thoughts weren't on her husband. They were on Richard. A shiver ran down her spine as she remembered the way Richard's hand had lingered on her back that afternoon. Too familiar, too long. His fingers had brushed her skin just above the waistband of her dress, sending an electric current through her body. It was innocent enough, but the look in his eyes, there was nothing innocent about that. She closed her eyes, guilt washing over her as her heart betrayed her once again. She shouldn't feel this way. But Richard's presence did something. To her, something she couldn't control. It had started months ago. A stolen glance at a family dinner, a fleeting touch as they passed each other in the hallway. At first, Emily told herself it was harmless. Richard was just being kind, charming as always. But then his compliments grew bolder, his touches more deliberate. And Emily? She never pulled away. She wanted to believe she was still in love with Daniel. She wanted to be the loyal wife, the perfect daughter-in-law. But the truth was her heart raced when Richard walked into the room, not Daniel. Her soul ignited when Richard spoke her name. One evening she had been in the library, searching for a book when Richard appeared behind her, his presence as commanding as his voice. "You're too beautiful to be hiding in here," he teased, his breath warm on her neck. Emily's heart had skipped a beat, her pulse quickening as she turned to face him. "Just needed some quiet," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Richard's gaze held hers, his eyes dark and intense. "It's a shame Daniel doesn't appreciate what he has." The words hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Emily's chest tightened. Did Richard know? Did he see through her facade? Did he know how lonely she felt in her marriage? "I should go," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. But as she moved to leave, Richard's hand closed around her wrist. Gentle yet firm. "Stay." His voice was low, pleading. "Just for a moment." Emily's resolve crumbled as his fingers brushed against her skin, sending a shiver through her body. In that moment, she was lost. Lost in his touch, his gaze, his intoxicating presence. She should have walked away. She should have resisted. But instead her lips parted, her eyes meeting his with an unspoken longing. And then he kissed her. The world fell away. Time ceased to exist. His lips were warm, possessive, and she melted against him, her fingers tangling in his hair. It was wrong. It was forbidden. But it felt so achingly right. They pulled apart, breathless, their eyes wide with the realization of what they had just done. Emily's heart raced, her body trembling as guilt crashed over her. This can't happen again," she whispered, her voice cracking. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. She was drawn to Richard like a moth to a flame. Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. "I know." But his fingers lingered on her waist, his touch searing her skin. "But I don't regret it." That was the beginning of the end. What started as stolen glances turned into secret meetings, hidden touches, midnight whispers. It became an affair they couldn't control, a love they shouldn't feel. They were careful, so careful. But secrets like this were never meant to stay hidden. Daniel began to notice the distance, the late nights, the way Emily would tense when he touched her. He convinced himself it was just work stress, just another rough patch. But the doubt lingered. One evening, Daniel came home to find Emily's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. A message from Richard. Tonight, usual place. Daniel's chest tightened, his vision blurring. What did that mean? Why was his father texting his wife in the middle of the night? Jealousy turned into suspicion. Suspicion turned into obsession. Daniel needed to know the truth. The affair spiraled out of control, becoming more dangerous, more reckless. They were playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before they got burned. Emily was in too deep, torn between guilt and desire, loyalty and love. She didn't want to hurt Daniel, but she couldn't let go of Richard. Richard, on the other hand, was losing himself in his obsession. Emily wasn't just his son's wife anymore. She was his possession, and Richard Thornton never lost what was his. But love built on lies was bound to shatter. And someone was going to pay the price. A forbidden love, a jealous husband, a powerful man who refused to lose, and a secret that was worth killing for. The lines were drawn. The betrayal was real. And the truth? It was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. In October 3rd, 2023, the days grew colder, the autumn air heavy with a sense of foreboding. Inside the mansion, however, the chill wasn't from the changing season. It was from the growing distance between Daniel and Emily. Daniel Thornton sat alone in his office, his fingers clenched around a half-empty glass of whiskey. The bitter liquid burned his throat, but not as much as the anger that consumed him. Something was wrong, he could feel it. At first he thought he was just being paranoid. But the signs were there. The late-night phone calls, the sudden need for space, the way Emily's eyes would flicker with guilt when he asked about her day. She was hiding something. Daniel's eyes drifted to the calendar on his desk. October 3rd, their wedding anniversary. Yet Emily was nowhere to be found. She claimed to be at a charity event, but Daniel had called the venue. She never showed up. His jaw tightened as he pulled out his phone, scrolling through his text messages. Nothing, not even a happy anniversary. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of love, laughter and trust, or so he thought. But the past few weeks had changed everything. He barely recognized the woman he once adored. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Margaret, the housekeeper, stood in the doorway, her face pale. "Sir, I thought you should see this," she stammered, her hands trembling as she handed him an envelope. It was addressed to Emily, but what caught his eye was the sender's name, Richard Thornton, his father. Daniel's heart skipped a beat, confusion swirling in his mind. Why was his father sending letters to his wife? They lived in the same house. They saw each other every day. Why the secrecy? He tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning the words, his face paling with each line. Dinner at the lake house. 8 p.m. Just us. His pulse quickened, his breath catching in his throat. The lake house, the place where his father conducted his private meetings, a place off limits to everyone, including Daniel. His hands shook as he dropped. The letter, his mind racing. Why would Emily be meeting Richard there, alone? His stomach churned as flashes of memory flooded his mind, the lingering touches, the stolen glances, the way Emily's laughter would echo through the halls whenever Richard was around. It was too familiar, too intimate. No, it couldn't be. But what if it was? His fingers tightened around his phone as he pulled up the security app, his jaw clenching as he accessed the live feed. The lake house. The screen flickered, and there they were. Emily and Richard, sitting close, too close, their faces inches apart as they laughed, their hands brushing in a way that was anything but innocent. Daniel's world shattered, his chest tightened, his vision blurring as the truth stared back at him. The woman he loved, the father he idolized, betraying him in the worst way possible. His mind spiraled, flashes of their moments together playing like a cruel movie, the anniversary dinners, the vacations, the laughter. All lies. The lies he had been too blind to see. The whiskey glass, shattered against the wall, the liquid dripping down like blood, staining the carpet. Daniel's rage boiled over, his body trembling with fury. He wanted to confront them, to storm into the lake house and demand answers. But he was frozen, paralyzed by the betrayal. How long had this been going on? How long had they been laughing? Behind his back, making a fool of him? He loved her, he trusted her, and Richard. His own father, the man he looked up to, the man he wanted to be. How could he do this? How could he destroy his own son? His thoughts were a jumbled mess. But one thing was clear. This wasn't an accident. This was planned, calculated. They didn't just betray him. They destroyed him. Daniel's hands shook as he shut off the security feed, his heart pounding in his chest. This was more than an affair. This was a declaration of war. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with a resolve he didn't know he possessed. He wouldn't confront them, not yet. He would wait, he would watch, and when the time was right, he would destroy them both. Daniel Thornton was no longer the naive, obedient son. They had broken him, but from those shattered pieces, something new was born. Vengeance. His father took his wife. His wife took his heart. Now he would take everything from them. His fingers brushed over his phone, his lips curling into a bitter smile. They thought he was weak, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. Daniel Thornton was done playing the fool, and secrets don't stay buried forever. The game was on. The lies were unraveling, and the truth was about to destroy them all. In November 18th, 2023, the night was thick with fog, a ghostly mist that clung to the air, muffling the world in eerie silence. The lake house stood alone, its grand silhouette reflecting off the still waters, an island of secrecy and sin. Daniel Thornton stood in the shadows, his eyes fixed on the house, his heart pounding in his chest. Tonight was the night he would finally end the lies. The night he would take back everything they had stolen from him. He watched as the lights flickered on in the study, the familiar silhouette moving past the window. Richard Thornton, his father, the man who betrayed him. Daniel's fingers tightened. Around the cold steel in his pocket, the knife felt heavy, comforting. He had chosen it carefully, a blade that wouldn't falter, just like his resolve. Tonight, justice would be served. The front door creaked open, and Emily appeared, her delicate frame wrapped in a crimson shawl, her hair cascading down her shoulders. Beautiful, deceptive, deadly. His chest tightened, pain mixing with rage as he watched her walk towards Richard, her hand resting on his shoulder, her lips brushing his cheek. She was his wife, but she belonged to another man, to his father. The betrayal was poison, burning through him. But tonight he would make them pay, every lie, every stolen touch. It would end here, in blood. He moved quietly, his footsteps muffled by the wet earth, as he approached the back entrance. The door was unlocked just as he expected. He knew the lake house better than anyone, every room, every creaking floorboard. This was his home, and they had turned it into a den of sin. His heart raced as he slipped inside, the shadows welcoming him, hiding him from view. They were in the study, laughing, drinking, celebrating their betrayal. His fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms as he moved closer, his ears straining to hear their voices. "He's so pathetic." Richard's voice was cold, mocking. "I raised a weakling." Emily's laugh was like shattered glass, piercing his heart. "He still has no idea, does he?" Her voice dripped with amusement. "He believes every lie I tell him." Daniel's world shattered. They weren't just having an affair. They were playing him for a fool, using him, laughing at him, humiliating him. The knife felt heavier in his hand, the metal cool against his skin. He could end it. He could burst in, end their lives with a single strike. But that would be too merciful. They deserved to suffer. He moved to the corner of the study, slipping behind the heavy drapes, his body tense, his breath shallow. He would listen. He would wait. And when the time was right, he would destroy them. Emily's voice was softer now, her words dripping with false sweetness. "You know, he idolizes you. He thinks you're perfect." Richard scoffed, his voice laced with disdain. "He's a failure, a disappointment. The only good thing he ever did was bring you into my life." Daniel's vision blurred. The father he admired, the man he spent his life trying to please, hated him, used him, betrayed him. His grip tightened on the knife, his chest heaving with silent rage. They took everything from him, his love, his dignity, his life. He watched as Richard poured another glass of whiskey, his arm wrapping around Emily's waist as he pulled her close, his lips brushing hers. They kissed, their bodies pressed together, their betrayal on full display. That was it. The air grew cold, the shadows closing in as Daniel stepped out from behind the drapes, his presence filling the room. The laughter died. The smiles vanished. Emily's face went pale, her body tensing as she pulled away from Richard. "Daniel, it's not what it looks like." His eyes were empty, cold as steel. "Don't lie to me, Emily. Not anymore." Richard's lips curled into a smirk, his confidence unshaken. "So you finally figured it out. I was wondering how long it would take." The knife gleamed in Daniel's hand, reflecting the firelight. His father's face showed no fear, no remorse, just amusement, mockery. "You think you're man enough to stop me, son?" Richard's voice was low, taunting. "Go ahead, do it. Show me you're not the weakling I raised." Daniel's heart pounded, his vision blurring with rage. Every lie, every insult, every stolen moment, it was all right here in front of him. He moved forward, the knife glinting as he raised it, his body trembling with fury. "You destroyed me," his voice cracked, his eyes locked on his father's. "You took everything from me." Richard's eyes darkened, his lips curling into a sneer. "You were never worthy of it." The blade plunged down, but it wasn't Daniel who struck. Emily screamed, her hands covered in blood, her body shaking as Richard fell to the floor, his eyes wide with shock. The knife was buried in his chest, the blood pooling beneath him. His lips moved, his voice a whisper. "Emily, why?" She stood over him, her eyes hollow, her body trembling. "You were going to ruin us. You were going to ruin everything." She turned to Daniel, her eyes pleading, her face pale. "You have to help me. We have to cover this up. He was going to destroy us. We didn't have a choice." Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing, his heart shattered. The woman he loved, the father he hated, both of them were monsters. He looked down at his father's lifeless body, the blood staining the floor. This was supposed to be his revenge. But Emily took it from him. She took everything. The room spun, the world crashing down as he realized the truth. He wasn't just a victim. He was part of this web of lies, this cycle of betrayal, and there was no way out. Emily's voice was a whisper, her fingers wrapping around his. "We have to bury him. We have to protect ourselves." Daniel's eyes drifted to the knife, to his father's lifeless eyes. This wasn't justice. This was hell, and the nightmare was just beginning. In November 19th, 2023, the morning sun rose, cold and unforgiving, casting harsh shadows across the mansion's walls. The world outside continued as if nothing had happened. But inside the Thornton estate, everything had changed. Detective Samuel Carter arrived just after dawn, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The perfectly manicured lawns, the expensive cars in the driveway, the immaculate facade of wealth and power. It all seemed too perfect, and in his experience, perfection was always a lie. The call had come in anonymously. A body, found in the lake house. Richard Thornton, dead. Samuel's jaw tightened as he stepped through the front door, his shoes sinking into the plush carpet. Murder didn't happen to families like this. At least that's what they wanted the world to believe. He was greeted by Emily, her face pale, her eyes swollen with tears. Perfectly timed, perfectly performed. Grief, but not shock. "Detective, it's horrible." Emily's voice trembled, her hands twisting together. I can't believe he's gone. Samuel watched her carefully, his eyes narrowing as he noted the subtle details, the way she avoided looking at the lake house, the way her shoulders remained tense despite her delicate sobs. She was afraid. But of what? When was the last time you saw him? Samuel's voice was calm, steady. He had interviewed enough widows to recognize genuine sorrow. This wasn't it. Last night, Emily whispered, her gaze flicking to the floor. He said he needed some time alone. He went to the lake house. I didn't want to bother him. Samuel's eyes hardened. And you didn't go check on him, not once. Emily's face tightened, her shoulders hunching as she shook her head. No, I went to bed early. A lie. Samuel knew it before she even finished speaking, but he didn't press her, not yet. Where's Daniel? Samuel's eyes flicked to the staircase. Your husband. Emily's face paled. He was working late. He wasn't home. Another lie. Samuel could smell the deceit. Before he could question her further, footsteps echoed down the hall and Daniel appeared, his face blank, his shoulders squared. He looked broken. Detective? Daniel's voice was cold, distant. I'll answer whatever you need. Samuel's gaze shifted between them, the perfect couple standing together, their faces etched with grief. But their eyes told a different story. They were hiding something, and Samuel intended to find out what. As he made his way to the lake house, his mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. Richard Thornton was no saint, powerful, manipulative. He had enemies. But this felt personal, intimate. The door creaked as he stepped inside, the stale air heavy with the scent of blood. The study was immaculate, untouched, except for the body on the floor. Richard lay sprawled, his eyes wide open, his lips parted. In a silent scream, blood pooled around him, dark and thick, soaking into the Persian rug. A knife protruded from his chest, the hilt glinting under the morning sun. Samuel knelt beside the body, his fingers grazing the wound. A clean stab, precise, deliberate, not an act of rage. This was planned. His eyes drifted to the broken whiskey glass, the amber liquid staining the floorboards. A struggle, but brief. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. No hesitation. No mercy. This was no robbery, this was revenge. He looked around, his eyes catching a faint smear of blood on the window latch. Someone left in a hurry, but not before making sure Richard was dead. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was execution. His phone buzzed and he answered, his voice low. Carter. Forensics found something, the voice crackled through the line. A fingerprint on the knife. It's a match. For Emily Thornton. Samuel's blood ran. Cold Emily. The grieving widow or the perfect liar? He turned back to the house, his jaw clenched as he replayed her performance. The tears, the tremors, the carefully chosen words. She was a damn good actress. But then he remembered Daniel's face, the haunted look in his eyes. The way he stood apart from Emily, never touching her, never meeting her gaze. He knew. Samuel was sure of it. Daniel knew about the affair, and maybe, just maybe, he knew about the murder too. His heart raced as he made his way back to the A mansion, his footsteps quickening as his mind pieced together the web of lies. They were in this together. They had to be. But then why would Emily leave her fingerprints? Why be so careless? Unless... The door opened, and Daniel stood in the hallway, his face pale, his hands trembling. Detective, did you find anything? Samuel's eyes narrowed. We found Emily's fingerprints on the murder weapon. Daniel's face fell, his eyes widening. No, that's not possible. The truth crashed down like a wave. Daniel hadn't known. He thought he was in control. He thought he was the one playing the game. But he was just another pawn. Emily wasn't the victim. She was the mastermind. Samuel's eyes darkened as he looked back at the mansion, at the woman waiting inside, her mask perfectly intact. She had fooled them all. She played her husband. She killed her lover. And she blamed them both. It was the perfect plan, but Samuel had seen behind the curtain, and the web of lies was about to unravel. The cold metal chair felt like ice beneath Emily Thornton as she sat perfectly poised, her delicate hands resting on her lap. Her face was calm, serene even, her eyes void of fear. She had rehearsed this. She was ready. Detective Samuel Carter stood across from her, his eyes fixed, unblinking. The evidence was clear. Her fingerprints on the knife, her blood on Richard's shirt, the affair, the lies, the betrayal. But something didn't add up. She was too calm, too prepared. "You know why you're here?" Samuel's voice was low, steady. "Your fingerprints were found on the weapon that killed Richard Thornton. You were having an affair with him, and now he's dead." Emily's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Affair? Is that what Daniel told you?" Her voice was smooth, almost playful. "Did he tell you how he found out?" Samuel's eyes narrowed, his shoulders tense. "He saw you, at the lake house with his father." Emily laughed, the sound cold, echoing off the steel walls. Oh, poor Daniel, always so desperate for his father's approval, so desperate for love. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "But he was never good enough, not for Richard, not for me." Samuel's jaw tightened, his hands clenching. "You were married to him. You promised to love him. Yet you betrayed him with his own father." Emily's eyes softened, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I never loved Daniel." Her words were sharp, cutting through the air. "He was weak, pathetic, just a means to an end." Samuel's blood ran cold. There was no remorse, no regret. Only calculation. "And Richard?" Samuel's voice wavered. "Did you love him?" Emily's smile vanished, her eyes hardening. "Richard Thornton was a monster. He used people, destroyed them, just like he destroyed his own son." Her voice shook, a flicker of pain breaking through. "I was just another pawn in his game, a pretty prize to show off, to control, to break." Samuel's heart pounded, his fingers curling into his palms. "So you killed him?" Emily's eyes gleamed. "No, I gave him what he deserved." Her voice was ice, her lips curling into a smile. "I made him suffer." Samuel leaned in, his voice low. "Daniel loved you. He would have done anything for you. And you destroyed him." Emily's face darkened, her eyes flashing with anger. "Daniel was a fool, a weak, pathetic fool. He never knew who I really was. None of them did." Samuel's eyes widened, a chill running down his spine. "Who are you?" Emily's smile was slow, chilling. "I'm the one who survived, the key." Room grew cold, the air thick with tension. She wasn't just a woman scorned, she was something far more dangerous. "I planned everything," Emily whispered, her voice a twisted melody. "I made them believe what I wanted them to believe. I made them dance to my tune." Her eyes flickered with triumph. "I knew Daniel would follow me. I knew he'd see us together. I wanted him to." Samuel's heart raced, the truth crashing down like thunder. "You set him up." Emily's smile widened. He was the perfect patsy, the broken son seeking revenge. All I had to do was push him, and he did the rest. Samuel's breath caught. "The fingerprints, the blood, you left it all there on purpose. You wanted to get caught." Emily's eyes sparkled. "I wanted you to find me, to see me as the grieving widow, the victim of a cruel affair. But the truth, she leaned back, her eyes dancing with wicked glee, is far more interesting. Samuel's body went cold, the pieces clicking into place. You were never the victim. His voice was barely above a whisper. You were the mastermind. Emily's laugh echoed through the room, cold and hollow. I played them all, Richard, Daniel, even you. Her eyes locked on his, a chilling finality in her gaze. I orchestrated the perfect tragedy, and no one saw it coming. Samuel's hands shook, his mind spinning. She wasn't just a murderer. She was a monster, a puppet master who destroyed a family and walked away clean. The door opened, the guards stepping in, their faces pale as they led her away. But Emily walked with her head held high, her steps graceful, her smile untouched. As the door closed behind her, her final words hung heavy in the air. People see what they want to see, detective. They always have. And in that moment, Samuel realized the truth. Emily wasn't just guilty, she was untouchable. She had won, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. In December 15th, 2023, the courtroom was cold, the air heavy with tension, as Emily Thornton stood before the judge, her head held high, her expression serene. The jury's verdict had been unanimous. Guilty. Guilty of murder. Guilty of manipulation. Guilty of betrayal. But she didn't flinch. Detective Samuel Carter watched from the back row, his jaw clenched, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He had done his job. He had exposed the truth. But somehow it felt hollow, empty. Emily's eyes remained cold, unblinking as the judge read her sentence. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A gasp rippled through the courtroom, but Emily remained motionless, her face calm, her shoulders squared. It was as if she had expected this, as if she had planned it all along. Daniel Thornton sat beside his mother, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He had lost everything, his father, his wife, his life. And now he was left to pick up the pieces, shattered by the lies that destroyed his family. As the guards approached, their hands wrapping around Emily's arms, she turned to face Daniel. Her lips curled into a smile, cold, calculating, triumphant. I warned you, Daniel, she whispered, her voice low, chilling. People see what they want to see. And you saw exactly what I wanted you to. Daniel's face crumbled, his body trembling as he realized the truth. She never loved him. She never loved anyone. She had played him, used him, destroyed him, and now she was walking away with the one thing he could never have, victory. The guards led her out, her head held high, her steps graceful. She walked like a queen being escorted from her throne, and in a way that's exactly what she was. She had orchestrated the perfect tragedy, turned husband against father, made them destroy each other, and she watched it all with a smile on her face. Samuel's chest tightened, his hands curling into fists. He had caught her, but she was still in control. Even in defeat, she was victorious. She had won. Daniel's body sagged, his head falling into his hands as the weight of the truth crushed him. His father was dead. His wife was a monster. And he was the fool who believed every lie. It should have been me, he whispered, his voice cracking. I should have died that night. Samuel turned away, his chest heavy with guilt. He had exposed the truth, but the cost was too high. The price of justice due was a broken man. Outside the courthouse the sky was grey, a cold wind cutting through the air. The world moved on, unaware of the nightmare that had unfolded within these walls. A family destroyed, a love twisted into betrayal, and a woman who wore her guilt like a crown. Emily Thornton was a murderer. But she was also a survivor, a puppet master who pulled every string and walked away without a scratch. Some crimes end with an arrest, some with a conviction, but some never truly end, not when the devil wears an angel's face, and as Samuel walked away, his heart heavy with regret, he knew one thing for certain: Emily Thornton would never stop playing the game, because she had already won.